The forest was quiet, and that should have warned Aria that something was wrong. She had learned over the years that true silence in the wild meant hunters were nearby, and hunters meant danger. But she was tired, so tired her bones ached, from 3 weeks of traveling between wolf packs, offering her healing skills for whatever small amounts of food and shelter they would give her. Her white hair hung limp around her shoulders. Her pale skin was covered with dirt, and her gray eyes burned from lack of sleep. She should have stopped hours ago, but the nearest town was still a day's walk away, and sleeping alone in the forest had never scared her before. She had been doing it since she was 15, since the wild wolf attack that killed her parents and left her an orphan with no pack willing to take in a girl who looked like a ghost. Aria's looks had always been a problem. Her hair was white as fresh snow, her skin so pale it was almost see-through, and her eyes were the color of winter storms. She wasn't completely albino, the doctors had told her parents, but close enough that other wolves found her creepy, unnatural, a bad sign. When her parents died protecting their small pack from wild wolves, no one had fought very hard to keep their strange-looking daughter. She had been given a bag of supplies and pointed toward the border before her parents were even buried. That was 7 years ago. 7 years of wandering, of offering her healing gift to anyone who would pay, of never staying long enough to make friends because friendships meant pain when they always pushed her away. She was good at healing. Her parents had both been gifted healers, and they had taught her well before they died. But no amount of skill could make people comfortable around someone who looked like death itself. The cry that broke the silence was high-pitched and terrified. A puppy. No, not a puppy, a wolf cub. Aria froze, every instinct screaming at her to keep walking. Wolf cubs meant protective parents nearby. Protective parents meant angry adult wolves who wouldn't like a stranger getting close to their young. But the cry came again, weaker this time, followed by a whimper that went straight through her heart. She was moving before she could talk herself out of it, following the sound through the thick bushes. Her healing sense, the magical awareness that let her feel injuries and sickness in living things, suddenly came to life. Pain. So much pain. The cub was badly hurt. Aria burst through a patch of thorny bushes and stopped dead. The wolf cub was small, couldn't be more than a few months old, with pure white fur covered in blood. It was dragging itself across the forest floor, one back leg twisted at a bad angle, deep cuts across its back still bleeding heavily. And standing between the cub and the trees were 3 wild wolves in their wolf forms, scarred and dirty, their eyes gleaming with mean intent. This wasn't a hunt. This was torture. They were playing with the cub, letting it try to escape before dragging it back, enjoying its fear. "Hey!" Aria shouted before her brain could stop her mouth. "Get away from it! Hey!" Aria shouted before her brain could stop her mouth. "Get away from it!" The 3 wild wolves turned to look at her, and she saw the moment they understood what she was. A lone omega, unarmed, defenseless. One of them shifted to human form, a tall man with a scarred face and cruel eyes. "Well, well," he said, his voice rough. "The moon goddess must be smiling on us today. First we get to kill the little prince, and now we get a pretty little omega to play with. Though you're a strange-looking thing, aren't you? Like a dead body that forgot to die. Prince." Aria's mind raced. White fur, being hunted by wild wolves who specifically wanted to kill it. Oh no, oh no, oh no. This wasn't just any cub. This was someone important. Someone whose death would matter. "I don't know what you're talking about," Aria said, trying to keep her voice steady. "But you need to leave that cub alone and get out of here." The wild wolf laughed, and the other 2 shifted to human form as well, surrounding her. "Or what? You going to fight us, little ghost girl? You don't even have a pack. I can smell it on you. You're nobody, nothing, and nobody's going to care when we're done with you." He was right. She was nobody. No pack would get revenge for her death. No one would even know she was gone. But that cub, that tiny white wolf bleeding on the ground, was somebody. And Aria had spent 7 years being nobody. She was tired of being nothing. Tired of walking past suffering because getting involved was too dangerous. Tired of surviving when she'd stopped living years ago. Too dangerous. Tired of surviving when she'd stopped living years ago. "You're right," she said quietly, reaching into her pack. "I am nobody, which means I've got nothing to lose." She pulled out the knife her father had given her, the only weapon she owned, and threw herself at the nearest wild wolf. The fight was brutal and desperate. Aria wasn't a warrior. She'd had basic self-defense training from her father. But she was a healer, not a fighter. The wild wolves were bigger, stronger, and trained to kill. But she had surprise on her side, and more importantly, she had anger. Years of built-up anger at a world that had treated her like trash, at packs that had used her skills and then thrown her out, at the unfairness of being punished for things she couldn't control. She got the first wild wolf in the throat, her knife finding the major blood vessel before he could block. He went down choking, blood spraying. The second one grabbed her from behind, his claws ripping across her ribs, tearing through cloth and skin. Aria screamed, but used the movement to drive her elbow into his face, breaking his nose. When he loosened his grip, she spun and stabbed upward, catching him under the chin. The blade went through his mouth and into his brain. He dropped. The third wild wolf, seeing his companions fall, shifted back to wolf form and jumped. Aria tried to dodge, but she was too slow, too injured. His teeth sank into her shoulder, shaking her like a rag doll. She felt bones crack, felt her knife slip from nerveless fingers. He threw her against a tree, and she hit hard, sliding down to the ground. Through blurring vision, she saw him walking toward the cub, which had been trying to crawl away during the fight. No. She hadn't gone through all this just to fail now. Aria's healing sense was screaming at her, listing her injuries in clear detail. 3 broken ribs, punctured lung, shattered shoulder, deep cuts across her stomach, internal bleeding. She was dying. She had minutes at best, but her gift wasn't just for sensing injuries. It was for healing them. And healing was just moving life energy from one place to another, encouraging the body to repair itself faster. She'd been taught to be careful with it, healing them. And healing was just moving life energy from one place to another, encouraging the body to repair itself faster. She'd been taught to be careful with it, to never push too hard, to never drain herself dangerously low. She'd never been taught what happened if you pushed past your limits, if you gave everything. Aria reached deep inside herself, past the supply of energy she normally used for healing, past the safety limits her parents had drilled into her, down to the very core of her life force, and she pulled. Power flooded through her, raw and ancient and agonizing. This wasn't normal healing magic. This was something older, something that felt like it was tearing her apart from the inside. Life Weaver, a distant part of her mind whispered. The ancient gift, the forbidden one. She threw all of it at the wild wolf, not to heal, but to drain. Life energy could flow both ways. She ripped the life force from his body, watching in grim satisfaction as he collapsed mid-step, aged decades in seconds, his fur going gray and patchy before he stopped breathing entirely. The backlash hit her like a physical blow. Using Life Weaver to kill instead of heal was apparently not recommended. Who knew? Aria would have laughed if she'd had the breath for it. She crawled toward the cub, every movement sending fresh waves of pain through her body. The little wolf was watching her with frightened blue eyes, whimpering. Up close, she could see he was beautiful, his white fur perfect except where blood stained it. Royal bloodlines always bred true. If the wild wolf had called him Little Prince, that meant this cub belonged to one of the ruling families, maybe even the Alpha King himself. "Hey, sweetheart," Aria whispered, reaching out with a shaking hand to stroke his head. "It's okay. You're safe now. I've got you." The cub whined and tried to lick her hand. His injuries were serious but not immediately deadly like hers. If she used her gift to heal him, she'd have nothing left for herself. She'd die, but if she didn't heal him, he might not make it until help arrived. He'd lost so much blood. That leg would never heal right without magical help, and those cuts on his back were deep enough to risk infection. Really, it wasn't even a choice. "This is going to feel weird," she told him, placing both hands on his small body. "But it'll help. I promise," placing both hands on his small body. "But it'll help. I promise." Aria reached for her gift again, but this time she didn't pull from the wild wolf or from the forest around them. She pulled from herself, from her own life force, the very energy that kept her heart beating and her lungs working. Life Weaver let you transfer life force between living things. She'd always been taught you could only transfer what someone had to spare, that taking too much would kill both healer and patient. She felt his broken leg straighten and knit back together, felt the cuts on his back close and seal. New fur already growing over pink skin, felt his strength returning, his breathing getting normal, his pain fading. She gave and gave and gave until there was nothing left to give. The world was going dark around the edges. Her heart was slowing. Her breathing had stopped at some point, and she hadn't even noticed. That was probably bad. The cub was healed, completely perfectly healed. He was nuzzling her face, whining in distress, as if he understood what she'd done for him. "It's okay," Aria slurred, her words barely able to be heard. "You're gonna be fine. Someone'll find you. Someone important, probably. You're too pretty to be a nobody like me." Her eyes closed. She felt herself falling, but distantly, like it was happening to someone else. This was a good death, she thought. Better than dying alone in the forest with no one to mourn her. At least she'd saved someone. At least her last act had mattered. The darkness swallowed her whole. She didn't see the cub throw back his head and howl, a sound far too powerful for something so small. She didn't see the way the howl rippled through the forest, carrying a frequency that only certain bloodlines could hear. And she didn't see the wolves that began to arrive. First came the wild ones, white wolves that lived deep in the ancient forest, drawn by the pulse of life weaver magic that had exploded through the area when Aria used her gift. Weaver magic that had exploded through the area when Aria used her gift. They came out from the trees slowly, carefully, forming a circle around the fallen woman and the cub. They could sense what she was, what she'd done, and they recognized power when they felt it. This was a life weaver, the first one in 300 years, and she'd used her gift to save a child. That made her sacred. That made her worth protecting. More wolves came, drawn by the cub's howl and the gathering of the wild ones. These were different, larger, all with perfect white fur that marked them as royal guard. And at the center of them, running faster than the rest, came the largest wolf Aria never got to see. Kael, Alpha King of the Northern Territories, burst into the clearing and shifted to human form before he'd even finished sliding to a stop. His hair was pale gold, almost white in the moonlight, and his eyes were the same brilliant blue as the cub's. He took in the scene with a single glance. 3 dead wild wolves, 1 tiny white cub that was howling over the body of a woman, and that woman lying in a pool of her own blood, so pale she looked like a ghost. No, not a ghost. She was breathing, barely. The faintest movement of her chest, the weakest flutter of a pulse in her neck. She was alive, but only just. Kael's wolf was screaming at him, clawing at his mind with an urgency he'd never felt before. "Mate, mate! Mate!" The bond hit him like a lightning strike, powerful and undeniable and terrifying. This woman, this stranger who'd somehow ended up in the middle of the forest with his son, was his true mate. His son. Finn. Kael's heart had been in his throat for the past 3 hours, ever since the attack on their traveling party had resulted in Finn being taken. He'd tracked them for miles, following the scent of his cub and the wild wolves who'd stolen him, praying to the moon goddess that he'd be fast enough. He'd expected to find his son dead or dying. He'd expected to have to kill the wild wolves himself, slowly and painfully, making them suffer for every moment of fear they'd caused his cub. He hadn't expected to find them already dead, killed by an Omega who looked like she'd barely survived the fight herself. No, not survived. She hadn't survived. She was dying. Right now, in front of him. Survived. She was dying. Right now, in front of him. Healers! Kael roared, even as he dropped to his knees beside her, his hands hovering over her body, afraid to touch and cause more damage. Now! 2 wolves from his guard shifted and ran back toward the camp they'd left behind. The others formed a defensive circle, watching the forest for any sign of more wild wolves. The others formed a defensive circle, watching the forest for any sign of more wild wolves. And Finn, his brave, foolish, beloved son, crawled into Kael's lap and whined, pawing at his father's chest. Kael wrapped one arm around his cub, holding him close, feeling the overwhelming relief of having him back safe and whole. But his eyes never left the woman. She looked so young, maybe mid-20s, with features that would have been beautiful if they weren't slack with unconsciousness, and gray with blood loss. Her white hair was spread around her head like a halo, covered in blood and dirt. Her clothes were torn, revealing dozens of injuries, any one of which should have been deadly. But it was her hands that caught his attention. They were resting on Finn's fur, even in unconsciousness, as if she'd been petting him when she'd collapsed. And there was a faint glow around those hands, a shimmer of magic that Kael recognized from old texts and ancient stories. "Life Weaver," he breathed. "You're a Life Weaver." That explained so much. Why Finn was perfectly healthy despite the blood covering his fur that Kael could smell was his own. Why this woman was dying despite being young and probably strong. She'd used the forbidden gift, the one that let you transfer life force itself. She'd saved Finn by giving him her own life force. She'd been willing to die for a cub she didn't know, for his son, his heir. And she was his mate, though she likely didn't even know it yet, considering she'd probably never felt the bond through the haze of pain and dying. Kael made a decision right then, kneeling in the blood-soaked dirt with his son in his arms and his dying mate at his feet. She'd saved the most precious thing in his world. She'd given everything to protect a child she'd never met. He would move heaven and earth to save her in return. The healers arrived within minutes, 3 of them, the best he had. They took one look at the woman, and their faces went serious. "Your Majesty," the head healer, an older woman named Vera, said carefully, "I don't know if—" "You will save her," Kael said, and there was no room for argument in his voice. "I don't care what it takes. I don't care if you have to work miracles. She saved my son. She's a Life Weaver and she's my mate. You will not let her die." Vera's eyes widened at that statement, but she nodded sharply and got to work. The other 2 healers joined her, their hands glowing with healing magic as they worked frantically to stabilize the worst injuries. Internal bleeding first, then the punctured lung, then the broken bones. They worked for 20 minutes straight, sweating and straining, pouring every bit of their power into keeping this strange woman alive. Finally, Vera sat back, wiping her forehead. "She's stable. Barely. She'll need constant care for the next week at least, possibly longer. But she should survive." The relief that flooded through Kael was almost painful. "Get a stretcher. We're taking her back to the palace immediately. And someone get my son cleaned up. He's got blood all over him." Finn whined and refused to move from where he was curled against the woman's side. He'd shifted at some point during the healing, back to his small human form, a 2-year-old boy with pale blonde hair and his mother's blue eyes. He was clinging to the woman's arm, tears streaming down his face. "Dada, don't let her die," he sobbed. "She saved me. The bad men were hurting me and she made them stop. She's nice. Don't let her die." Kael's heart clenched. Finn had barely spoken since his mother's death in childbirth 2 years ago. He'd been slowly withdrawing, becoming quieter and more fearful, despite all of Kael's efforts to help him heal. And now here he was, speaking in full sentences, begging for the life of a stranger who'd sacrificed everything to protect him. "She's not going to die," Kael promised, gently scooping his son into his arms. "I swear it, Finn. She's going to be okay, and when she wakes up, you can thank her yourself." They made a stretcher from branches and cloaks, handling the woman as carefully as possible. Kael carried Finn, who refused to let go of the woman's hand, so they ended up in an awkward procession with the boy stretched between his father's arms and the woman's side. The wild wolves that had gathered melted back into the forest, but Kael noticed they didn't go far. They were following, staying just out of sight, but clearly unwilling to leave the Life Weaver completely. That was going to be interesting to deal with later. For now, his only concern was getting her somewhere safe and keeping her alive. The journey back to the palace took 3 days. They had to move slowly to avoid jostling her too much, and they had to stop frequently so the healers could reinforce their work. Kael barely slept, spending most of his time sitting watch over her, one hand holding his son, and the other resting near enough to his mate that he could feel her weak heartbeat through their bond. He learned everything he could about her during those 3 days. Her name was Aria, according to the papers in her pack. She was a traveling healer with no pack affiliation, 22 years old, born to Samuel and Lydia, both deceased, no living family listed. She owned almost nothing of value, some healing supplies, a spare set of clothes, her father's knife still sticky with wild wolf blood, and a small book that turned out to be her mother's journal of healing recipes. She was alone in the world, had been alone since she was 15 if Kael was reading the dates right. 7 years of wandering by herself, probably facing prejudice and suspicion because of her unusual appearance. 7 years of surviving day to day with no home to return to. Not anymore. She had a home now, whether she wanted it or not. She had a mate, and a cub who'd attached to her so hard that Finn threw a screaming fit any time they tried to separate him from her for more than a few minutes. She had a future, if Kael had anything to say about it. When they finally reached the palace, Kael had her placed in a suite of rooms right next to his own. The healers set up a rotation to watch her around the clock, and Kael made it clear that her care was their top priority. Finn refused to leave her side, sleeping in a small cot next to her bed, holding her hand even in sleep. It took 6 days for her to wake up. 6 days of watching her chest rise and fall, of feeling the mate bond slowly strengthen as her body healed, of his son talking to her unconscious form about everything and nothing, as if his words could pull her back from wherever she'd gone. On the 6th day, just after dawn, her eyes opened. Kael was there. He was always there. He watched as she blinked slowly, her gray eyes confused and unfocused. She tried to sit up and immediately gasped in pain, falling back against the pillows. He watched as she blinked slowly, her gray eyes confused and unfocused. She tried to sit up and immediately gasped in pain, falling back against the pillows. "Easy," Kael said softly, moving to her side. "You're safe. You're in the palace. You've been unconscious for 6 days." Aria's eyes finally focused on him, and Kael saw the moment she took in his appearance. The recognition of power in his bearing, the understanding of who exactly she was talking to. But there was no fear in her eyes, just exhaustion and confusion. "The cub," she croaked, her voice rough from not being used. "Is he? He's fine," Kael assured her. "Thanks to you. He's right here, actually. He hasn't left your side since we brought you in." He pointed to the small cot where Finn was curled up, still holding her hand in his sleep. The sight of it made Aria's eyes fill with tears. "I thought I died," she whispered. "I gave him everything. I didn't think there'd be anything left." "You almost did die," Kael said honestly. "You used Lifeweaver gift. You gave my son your own life force to heal him. Do you understand how rare that gift is? How dangerous?" Aria's eyes widened. "Lifeweaver? But that's supposed to be extinct, lost for centuries. I'm just a healer." "I didn't mean to." "You awakened it," Kael explained gently, in a moment of pure sacrifice, trying to save someone you didn't even know. That's how the gift works, according to the old texts. It only shows up in those with the purest intentions. He paused, studying her face. "My name is Kael. I'm Alpha King of the Northern Territories, and the cub you saved is my son, Finn, my only child, the heir to my throne. You didn't just save a random pup. You saved my everything." The implications of that seemed to hit her all at once. Aria closed her eyes, a tear slipping down her cheek. "I didn't know, He was so small and they were going to kill him. I couldn't let them kill him." "I know," Kael said softly. "That's what makes you extraordinary. You saw a child in danger and you didn't hesitate. You gave everything to protect him." He hesitated, then added, "There's something else you need to know. When I found you, I felt you need to know. When I found you, I felt the bond, the mate bond. You're my true mate, Aria." Her eyes flew open, shock written across her features. "That's not possible. I'm nobody. I don't even have a pack. The moon goddess paired you with me because you're exactly what I need." Kael interrupted. "Someone brave enough to fight impossible odds. Someone selfless enough to die for a stranger's child. Someone strong enough to unlock a gift that's been lost for 300 years. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and took her free hand. "I'm not asking you to accept it right away. I know this is overwhelming, but I want you to know that you're safe here. You have a place here, and my son has clearly decided you're his person, so you're not getting rid of us easily." As if called by his words, Finn stirred and opened his eyes. When he saw Aria was awake, his whole face lit up. "You're awake! Dada, she's awake! I told you she'd wake up!" He scrambled onto the bed, carefully avoiding her injuries, and threw his small arms around her neck. "Thank you for saving me. The bad men were scary, and you made them go away. You're so brave. Will you stay? Please stay. I don't want you to go." Aria looked overwhelmed by the enthusiastic toddler attached to her, but Kael saw something soft and warm bloom in her eyes. "Hey, sweetheart," she said gently, awkwardly patting his back with her free hand. "I'm glad you're okay. You're all healed up, right? Nothing hurts?" "Nothing hurts," Finn confirmed. "You fixed me all up. Dada says you gave me your life to make me better. That means you're my hero. And also you're pretty, like snow." "I like snow. Despite everything, despite the pain and confusion and overwhelming nature of the situation," Aria laughed. It was weak and shaky, but genuine. "I like snow too," she said softly. Over the following weeks, Aria recovered slowly. Kael made sure she had everything she could possibly need: the best food, comfortable clothes, books to read, and peace and quiet when she needed it. But more than anything, he gave her space. He didn't push the mate bond, didn't demand anything from her, just let her heal and adjust to her new situation. Finn, on the other hand, had no concept of personal space. He was attached to Aria's hip from the moment she could get out of bed. He followed her everywhere, chattering about his toys and his lessons and his father and everything else his 2-year-old brain could think of. At first, Aria seemed unsure of how to handle him, awkward with the physical affection and constant attention, but slowly Kael watched her defenses crumble. Watched her start to smile when Finn came running. Watched her automatically reach for him when he stumbled. Watched her become the mother Finn had never had, not because the mate bond demanded it, but because she genuinely cared for the small boy who decided she hung the moon. The Lifeweaver gift was another matter. Aria was terrified of it, afraid to use it, afraid of what it might do. Kael brought in scholars, ancient texts, anyone who might have information about the gift. They learned together that Lifeweaver wasn't just about transferring life force. It was about balance, about understanding the flow of life energy in all living things. With practice and training, Aria learned to heal without draining herself dangerously. She learned to sense illness before it showed up, to strengthen someone's life force without taking from her own. She became invaluable to the palace healers, teaching them techniques that had been lost for centuries. But the real breakthrough came when she discovered she could do something no one expected. She could sense emotional wounds as well as physical ones, could help heal trauma, ease anxiety, soothe nightmares. It was that aspect of her gift that finally helped Finn begin to process his mother's death, helped him understand that it was okay to love someone new without betraying the mother he'd never known. 3 months after Aria first woke up in the palace, Kael found her in the gardens with Finn. It was a warm afternoon, and they were making flower crowns. Finn's small hands clumsy but determined, as Aria patiently showed him how to weave the stems together. "For you, Dada," Finn announced when he noticed Kael approaching, holding up a lopsided crown of daisies. "We made you pretty." Kael obligingly bent down so his son could place the crown on his head, earning a delighted giggle. Down so his son could place the crown on his head, earning a delighted giggle. "Very pretty," he agreed seriously. "Thank you, Finn. Did you make one for Aria, too?" "She made her own," Finn said, "because she's a big girl and big girls can do stuff by themselves. But I helped." Aria smiled, her own crown of wildflowers sitting crookedly on her white hair. Aria smiled, her own crown of wildflowers sitting crookedly on her white hair. She looked so different from the dying woman Kael had found in the forest. Healthy now, with color in her cheeks and light in her eyes. Happy. Finn. "Why don't you go show your crown to Healer Vera?" Kael suggested. "I bet she'd love to see it." "Okay." Finn bounced to his feet and ran off toward the palace, his energy apparently endless. Kael sat down on the bench next to Aria, close but not touching, always careful to respect her boundaries. "He loves you," he said quietly. "You know that, right? Not because of what you did for him, not because of some magical bond, but because you're patient with him and kind to him and you make him feel safe." Aria looked down at her flower crown, her fingers tracing the petals. "I love him too," she admitted. "I didn't expect to. I never thought about having children. Never thought I'd get the chance with no pack and no mate. But Finn, he's special. He's sweet and brave and so full of life. Being with him makes me feel like maybe I'm not just a wanderer anymore. Like maybe I could be someone's mother," Kael finished softly. "You could be his mother, Aria, if you wanted to be. He needs one, and I think you need him just as much as he needs you." "I'm not his mother," Aria said, but there was no conviction in her voice. "His mother died. You're the woman who raised him for the past 3 months, Kael said. "The one who kisses his bruises and reads him stories and teaches him about flowers. The one he runs to when he has nightmares. The one whose room he sneaks into every night because he feels safer sleeping close to you. Biology doesn't make someone a mother. Love does." Aria's eyes filled with tears. "I'm scared," she whispered. "What if I'm not good enough? What if I mess him up? I don't know how to be a mother. My own mother died when I was too young to remember her properly. Neither did his biological mother, Kael pointed out gently. She died before she could hold him. But you know what you do have? You have a gift for understanding emotions, for healing trauma, for making people feel valued. You saved his life once. Now you're saving it again every single day just by being here, by showing him that he's worthy of love and protection. He reached over and took her hand, threading his fingers through hers. And you have me. We can figure this out together, hers, and you have me. We can figure this out together. We can be his parents together. If you'll let us. Aria looked at their joined hands, then up at his face. The mate bond, she said hesitantly. I can feel it now. I didn't before when I was too weak, but now it's there, pulling at me, telling me you're mine. I've felt it since the moment I saw you, Kael admitted, lying in the dirt, covered in blood, barely breathing. And all I could think was mine, my mate, the woman I've been waiting for my whole life. But I want to be clear about something. Aria, I don't want you to feel pressured by the bond. I don't want you to feel pressured by the bond. I don't want you to accept me because fate demands it. If we do this, I want it to be because you choose me. Not because the moon goddess says we're meant to be together, but because you wake up every day and decide you want to be with me. That's a lot of pressure, Aria said, but she was smiling slightly. What if I decide I don't want to be with you? Then I'll respect your choice, Kael said seriously. You'll still have a place here. You'll still be Finn's guardian if you want to be. The mate bond doesn't give me ownership of you. It's a gift, not a chain. And gifts can be declined. Aria studied his face for a long moment, her gray eyes searching. You mean that? She said, wonder in her voice. You'd really let me stay if I stayed. And I'd really, really prefer if eventually you'd consider accepting the bond. Because I think we could be amazing together. I think you could be not just Finn's mother, but my partner, my equal, my Luna. I've never been anyone's equal, Aria said quietly. I've always been the weird one, the ghost girl, the outsider. People tolerate me because I'm useful, not because they value me. I value you, Kael said firmly. Not because you're useful, though you are. Not because you saved my son, though I'll be grateful for that every day of my life. But because you're smart and strong and kind even after the world gave you every reason not to be. Because you make my son laugh. Because you're teaching my healers techniques they never dreamed of. Because when I look at you, I see my future. He lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. Take your time. There's no rush. We have all the time in the world. But know that I'm here, waiting, hoping, ready to build something amazing with you whenever you're ready. Aria didn't answer with words. Instead, she leaned forward and rested her head on his shoulder, a gesture of trust that meant more than any statement. They sat like that for a long time, flower crowns on their heads and fingers linked, while Finn's laughter drifted across the garden. It took another month before Aria came to Kael's study one evening, her expression nervous but determined. I've decided, she said without introduction, about the bond, about us. Kael's heart was pounding, but he kept his expression calm. And I want to try, Aria said. Not because fate says we should, but because you've been patient with me, because you gave me space to heal and time to think, because you let me fall in love with your son without expecting anything in return, because when I imagine my future now, you're in it, both of you. Relief and joy flooded through Kael so intensely he almost couldn't breathe. You're sure? You can still change your mind. I meant what I said about... Aria stepped forward and kissed him, cutting off his rambling. It was soft and tentative, their first kiss, and it made the mate bond flare so brightly between them that they both gasped. When they pulled apart, both breathing hard, Aria smiled. I'm sure. I want this. I want you. I want to be Finn's mother, and your mate, and the Luna of this pack. I want to stop running and start living. I want a family. Then you have one, Kael said, pulling her close. You have us. For as long as you'll have us. The mating ceremony was held under the full moon a week later, with Finn serving as the ring bearer and nearly dropping the banns 3 times. The entire pack attended, along with representatives from neighboring territories. But the most unusual guests were the white wolves that came out from the forest. Wild ones who'd never been seen near the palace before. They formed a circle around the ceremony, a protective honor guard for the life weaver who'd never been seen near the palace before. They formed a circle around the ceremony, a protective honor guard for the life weaver who'd brought their kind and shifters together. When Kael marked Aria, claiming her as his mate and Luna before the entire assembly, the bond between them settled into place perfectly. Not a chain binding her against her will, but a choice they'd both made freely, a partnership built on respect and trust and love. Finn cheered louder than anyone, then demanded to know if this meant Aria was officially his mother now. "Yes," Aria said, kneeling down to hug him. "If you want me to be. I want. Finn threw his arms around her neck. "Best mother ever. Even better than flower crowns." Years later, when Finn was older and starting his own training as heir, he'd ask his mother about the day she saved him. About what made her risk everything for a stranger's cub. Aria would smile and pull him close. "You weren't a stranger," she'd tell him. "The moment I saw you, hurt and scared, you became mine to protect. That's what family does. We protect each other, and you gave me the greatest gift in return. You gave me a reason to stop running and start living. You gave me a home." And Finn, who'd grow up to be a strong and compassionate leader, would remember those words, would build his rule on the principle his mother taught him. That strength isn't measured by power but by sacrifice. That the greatest leaders are those who give everything to protect the weakest among them. That family isn't always blood, but it's always a choice. The Life Weaver's gift would pass down through the royal line, awakening in Finn's own children generations later. And the story of the ghost girl who saved a prince and became a queen would be told and retold, a legend of sacrifice and love that reminded all wolves that the moon goddess rewards those with pure hearts. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe for more werewolf romance tales. Alpha Kings, rejected mates, and powerful Omega stories. Hit the notification bell so you never miss an upload. Leave a comment below telling me what you thought of Aria and Kael's story and what kind of werewolf stories you'd like to see next. Your support means everything and helps me create more content like this. Thank you for reading, and I'll see you in the next story.